The Wendigo entered me. It told me to kill them. A man said that to a Mountie in Fort Saskatchewan in a jail cell in the spring of 1879. By December that year, Canada had hanged him for cannibalizing, eating his wife, eating his mother, his brother, and eating 6 of his own children, killing them, mutilating their bodies, and eating their flesh and their organs. Last year, a Canadian documentary crew went into the BC bush because there was a report of the same thing in 2024. 145 years after Canada thought it had put a rest to this. And let me tell you what happened in the cabin in the winter of 1878. Andrew here for Permanent Underclass, where we explore the weird stuff your therapist would tell you to avoid. The, oh cool, now I'll never sleep again side of reality. If you're easily scared, easily offended, or easily anything, you're probably in the wrong place. The man's name was Swift Runner. Central Alberta, born in Canada, Cree raised, Hudson Bay trader, Northwest Mounted Police guide. The authorities knew him well and they trusted him. In the winter of 1878, when he took his family into the woods and came back alone. Here's what you need to understand before I tell you this story. The people who live on that land, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Algonquins, had a word for what happened to Swift Runner. A word that's been reported for 10,000 years. They had stories about how to avoid it, how to recognize it, and how to kill it before it came for you. And when Swift Runner was arrested, and when he was finally asked what happened in that cabin, he used the word that he knew. He named the thing that came for it. A Wendigo. Fall of 1878. Swift Runner was still on good terms with everyone who mattered. Fort Saskatchewan knew him. The Hudson's Bay Post knew him. 3 years earlier, he'd guided the Northwest Mounted Police through wild country most of the officers couldn't have navigated on their own. But his love for the bottle started to pull him under whiskey benders and drinking too much that ended with police involvement. Decisions that didn't make sense for his own Cree band. The people he'd grown up with finally had had enough and told him to leave, to go. Not a formal exile, just you can't be here anymore with us like this. So when winter came, he did what his people had done for generations. He took his family, he took them into the woods to hunt and trap throughout the frigid, cold Canadian winter months. His own wife, Charlotte, his mother, his brother, and 6 children, the eldest son was old enough to build his own trap line, all went up into the woods to camp over the winter. They set up camp in the wilderness north of Fort Saskatchewan, a cabin, a clearing, a trap line, the kind of winter camp that the Cree families had been making for thousands of years. 25 miles away was a Hudson's Bay Company post, fully stocked, food, anything you could want, flour, dried meat, salt, pork. The Hudson's Bay Company's entire business in 1878 was keeping people in the bush from starving. So they had these goods there. 25 miles, 1 day's walk on snowshoes, less if you can run. That's where the Hudson Bay Company outpost was. Remember that number. Because by the time Swift Runner walked out of the woods, in the spring of 1879, 8 of 9 people who went in with him were dead. The first death wasn't murder. The hunting was bad that winter. The game had moved south or hadn't moved at all. The trap line came up empty more often than not. By December, the family was stretching what they had, rationing their flour, rationing their dried meat, rationing everything they had in their stockpile of food. The kind of winter that had killed people in these types of camps before. It was a cruel winter. The eldest son worked the trap line with his father, the oldest child, the capable one, the one who could have carried his own mother or his siblings on his back if it came to it. He's the one who died first. Starvation. Real starvation. The documented kind. The kind the coroners would have written down without a second thought if anyone had been there to write it. A boy in the bush in the winter, in the deep winter, who ran out of food. Despair took Swift Runner when his son died. The Cree who knew him, the NWMP officers, so the Northwest Mounted Police, who worked with him, they would all later describe a man they didn't recognize, a man whose soul was missing. There were 8 people left in the cabin after Swift Runner's son died. A wife, a mother, and a brother. 5 children, the youngest small enough still needing to be carried. And 25 miles south, a Hudson's Bay outpost full of flour, dried meats, and salt and pork and all the food that they could need. But they didn't go. He didn't send anyone. He stayed in the cabin with his family, with his hunger, and with his empty despair. And over the next several weeks, he ate his family. Charlotte first, his wife, the mother of his 6 children. She lay down to sleep in a bed she shared with the man stuck in his hollow sadness, weak and cold, a man who she thought loved her, a man who was about to kill her and eat her. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, he had an axe. Then his madness took him to his mother, the woman who had raised him, who spoke to him in Cree when he was a boy, who had come into the woods because where else would she go? He used that same axe on her neck, the way it was meant to be used on a tree, and she fell fast. Then Swift Runner went to his brother, the last adult left who could have fought back. He couldn't fight Swift Runner's axe in his skull. Then the children, 5 of them, all weak, none larger than 3 feet tall. He took them one at a time, the oldest remaining first, old enough to understand what was happening. The smallest last, the one still small enough to need carrying. This wasn't one night. This took weeks. Between the killings, life in that cabin continued. Fire, meals, sleep, whatever screaming was there, whatever pleading, it ended. And then the next day came, and the next killing, and the next after that. And then, the day after that, the children still alive, who were watching their siblings disappear one by one into whatever Swift Runner had become. He killed them, carved their flesh from their bodies, removed their organs, and then he ate them. Not in desperation or starvation. He did it methodically, over time. What was left of his family hung in the cabin and dried, the way dried meat hangs in a trapper's cabin, because that's what he turned it into, a trap. He cracked open their bones for the marrow, every one of them, not one bone left unmutilated. Outside, snow and ice, and the desolation of cold winter inside. The fire kept shining light on the horror inside. 25 miles south, a Hudson Bay outpost full of flour and dried meat and salt and pork. Swift Runner knew it. He had been there before. He knew what they had to sell. He knew its purpose. He had furs to trade for these items and any goods he would need. But he didn't go. By March, Swift Runner had killed and consumed 8 full people. His wife, his mother, his brother, and 5 of his own children. And when the snow started to melt, in April, all his family were dead. He walked out, leaving their bones to face the elements alone. April 1879. Spring had melted the snow fast. The rivers were opening up, and Swift Runner had walked out of the woods alone and made his way to Fort Saskatchewan. He walked into the settlement the same way he'd walked in 100 times before. The Northwest Mounted Police knew his face. The HBC, Hudson Bay Company, knew his face. And when the officers asked him where his family was, he had a story ready. His wife had killed herself, he told them. He couldn't take the winter. She killed herself, took her own life. The rest of the family, his mother, his brother, and 6 children, had all died of starvation, one after another, throughout the long winter. A terrible, terrible winter. So cold, so desolate. A real Cree tragedy. He was the only one who survived. The officers listened. They nodded. They wrote it down. And one of them looked at him and noticed something. His exact words survived and are in the official case file. The prisoner arrived at our camp in the spring and did not look very poor or thin or as if he'd been starving at all. He didn't look like a man who just survived a brutal, unforgiving winter that killed 8 people. He looked fine. He looked fed. The officers didn't arrest him. Not yet. They didn't have to. They just told him they were headed north with him. Back to the camp. Back to see for themselves what had happened. And Swift Runner had no way to say no without confessing on the spot. So he went with them. And somewhere on that trail, back to the camp, he tried to run. They caught him within the hour. Then tied his hands together to keep him slower, and they kept going north, through the melt, back to the cabin. And when the Northwest Mounted Police officers reached the camp, that had been Swift Runner's winter home, they didn't find a starvation tragedy. They found a butcher's kill floor. Bones everywhere, cracked open. Every single one exactly as he'd left them. Human skulls, small child-sized one, large adult ones. The fire pit black and cold. The cabin silent. 8 people reduced to empty bones. Only what Swift Runner couldn't eat. All he had left behind when he walked out a few days earlier. And then one of the officers looked south. 25 miles south, because every officer on that party knew the country. They knew where the nearest Hudson's Bay post was. They knew what was in it. They knew it was 1 day's walk on snowshoes, less if you ran. This man had not been starving. This man had not been wounded. This man had stayed 25 miles away from flour, dried meat, salt, pork, food provisionings for 5 months on purpose, and chose to stay in that cabin and kill his family one by one, butcher their corpses, and remove their organs and flesh and eat them. The famine explanation died right there on the kill floor of that butcher cabin. There was no defense left. There was only the question nobody wanted to ask in real loud words. What kind of hunger does that to a man? The Cree already had a word for it. They arrested Swift Runner on the spot. brought him back to Fort Saskatchewan in chains, put him in a jail cell, and that's where Swift Runner finally told the truth. He confessed to all of it. The wife, the mother, the brother, the 5 children, he told them he had killed them and he had eaten them and he had cracked open their bones. He didn't spare any details. He didn't plead insanity either, the way a white man's court would have expected. He told them what had actually happened. He told them the Wendigo had entered him. He said, in the way you would say it as a matter of fact, the way a man tells a doctor where the wound is, that a Wendigo had come for him in that cabin, he said. The hunger that doesn't stop, the spirit of the old Cherokee had warned about, the thing that wears a human shape until there's nothing human left. And once it was in him, he said, he couldn't stop it. It had used his hands, it had used his axe, it had used his mouth. And then, and this is the part the historians suffer with, Swift Runner asked them to hang him. Not out of guilt, not out of repentance. He told them he wanted the rope because if they killed him, the Wendigo that had come for him would die with him. Hanging was the only way to make sure it didn't move on to someone else. The police obliged him. December 20th, 1879, 7:30 in the morning, Fort Saskatchewan, pitch black, and swirling snow. 60 people bundled against the cold had come to watch. The sheriff was late because of the weather. The hangman was also nervous. Swift Runner walked to the gallows calmer than anyone there to die. And then Canada dropped the first legal hanging in Alberta's history through the trapdoor. And the file was closed. The Cree have a word for what happened to Swift Runner. So do the Ojibwe and the Algonquin. Every nation that lived in cold country, from Alberta to Labrador, from the Great Lakes to the Arctic tree line, they had been warning about the Wendigo for 10,000 years before a European ever set foot on the continent. 10,000 years. Stories, ceremonies, songs, warnings passed down from elder to child about what happens to a person when the hunger that lives outside gets inside of them. They knew what it looked like. They knew what it did. They had specific practices for recognizing it, avoiding it, and killing the person it had taken so it couldn't spread. Then Swift Runner swung at the end of a rope in 1879, and about 20 years later, a brand new profession showed up to explain exactly what happened. Psychiatry. Early 1900s, a bunch of white anthropologists and psychiatrist men who had never lived in the winter in the bush, never trapped, and never known hunger past noon, got together and published a paper saying, actually, the Wendigo isn't a spirit, it's a mental illness. And only Indigenous people get it. It's called Wendigo psychosis. It's a culture-bound psychiatric disorder specific to Algonquin-speaking peoples caused by starvation conditions and cultural conditioning. Not real, just in their heads. Look at that sentence. Read it slow. A psychiatrist disorder specific to Algonquin-speaking peoples. These men sat in offices in Toronto, New York, big cities, and said, the people who have lived in this land for 10,000 years have been experiencing a mental illness unique to them caused by conditions they live in. We know because we have a diagnosis now, and for the next 80 years that was accepted. It's in medical textbooks. It's still cited today. Then, in 1982, an anthropologist named Lou Marano published a paper basically saying, actually, guys, none of this ever happened. Wendigo psychosis doesn't even exist. Never did. It was a colonial fabrication. Swift Runner was just a murderer. The Cree made up all the rest. So the official history goes from spiritual phenomenon to mental illness. Only your people get it. It never happened. You imagined it. And in 100 years, without ever asking, the people who'd been telling the same stories the whole time, meanwhile, Cree communities kept reporting sightings. Ojibwe communities kept reporting sightings, kept losing people in the bush, kept finding bones, kept having stories about something in the woods that walked in on 2 legs and was hungrier than anything should ever be. They never stopped. They're still reporting them now. There's a town in northwest Ontario called Kenora. It sits on Lake of the Woods a few hours east of Manitoba. Good people there, ice fishing, canoe country, and if you drive into Kenora today in 2026, you will see with your own eyes a sign that calls the town the Wendigo capital of the world. They don't call it that as a joke. They call it that because people keep seeing things in the bush. Hunters, trappers, truckers on lodging roads, Ojibwe elders who've been telling the same kind of story their grandparents told. It never stopped. It just got quieter. Because a town that publicly admits that a Wendigo problem is a town nobody wants to take seriously. So they put the word on a sign and let the tourists think it's cute. And then in 2024, something happened that put it back in the open. A report came into the Canadian Paranormal Society in British Columbia bush, a credible witness, a sighting serious enough that an investigator named Jason Hewlett, along with researcher Morgan Kundenson and Peter Wren, went into the woods to check it out. Hewlett spent the better part of a year on it. And at the end of that year, he did 2 things. He made a documentary called Tracking the Wendigo, and he wrote a book called Heart of Ice. Both came out in 2025. Both say the same thing. Something is out there. Not mental illness, not colonial fabrications, not Swift Runner's ghost. Something that was there in 1878 and was there in 1879 and was there in 1982. Was there in June of 2024. Something that Cree had a word for before any of us arrived. Something they're still warning about. And if you live where it lives, you don't say its name at night. You don't call it down. You don't ask it in. That's not folklore advice. That's survival advice. If this kind of content keeps you up at night, do me a favor, like and subscribe. And if you want more of this, follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Permanent Underclass or at X on the Underclass, where we post stuff on there that doesn't always make it to YouTube. Thanks.